Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Quick Start using the right button with me, Dahlia. In this session, I will give you a quick overview of how to use the right button in Sudowrite and answer any questions you may have about this. Since this is a quick start session aimed at new users, we'll take all the things step by step and proceed at a leisurely pace. This class will be divided into two bigger parts. The first portion is a bit more lecture type thing where I'll cover the essentials of write settings, auto write, guided write, a tone shift. And then we'll follow this up with a demonstration where I'll show you my approach of using the right button in action. I hope that this way we'll get a little bit, and a little bit better time management than my usual classes where I'll get stuck into demonstration. We don't get to finish everything, but I also hope that we'll still have time for Q&A at the end. For today's class, I also prepared a document that I will share in the chat with you now, which contains the most important notes and links to example projects, also the project we'll be working on today. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of the right button, I would like to tell you a bit about the reasons why I love using the right button and why I decided to host these sessions regularly. Because seeing how other teachers teach classes, I realized that the right button doesn't get the attention it deserves in a lot of classes by a lot of people, or at least that I think it deserves. Since I'm more of a planner, which means that I like some planning before I write, but I don't work well if I have to outline every single detail in advance. That's why I've never warmed up to the chapter generator and working with beats and all that, since it feels too rigid for me and like I'm being strapped in a straitjacket if I have to know exactly how a whole chapter has to pan out in advance. The right button, on the other hand, is perfect for writers like me who prefer this flexibility, and it lets you develop smaller portions of your story without needing everything mapped out in advance. You can just dive in and see where the writing takes you, regardless of how much you have already prepared. But the great thing about the right button is that it's not only good for pantsers. Since it's connected to the story Bible, it also works well for all the plotters in the audience, especially if you prefer writing most of your content yourself, but still want AI support whenever you feel stuck or need to fill in the gaps. It's a truly versatile tool, and I'm excited to show you how you can use it in your writing. So let's now jump into Sudowrite. Today, we'll be working on a project I started during my latest Write With Me, called The Secret Songs of Whispering Pines. It's a queer love story about a woman named Nora who returns to her hometown Whispering Pines after inheriting her grandmother's mansion. While renovating the house, she falls in love with the carpenter Ellie, and in the process, not only brings the mansion back to life, but also herself. But before we will dive into this story, we'll get to the exciting lecture part of all of this, where I will introduce to you how all the things work. So you'll find the right button up here in this corner. And write as a feature, well, it essentially does what it says, it writes text. But it also, if you have already text in document, reads what's in there and builds upon it in a logical way. This helps maintain consistency, especially when you're expanding on scenes. And if you make edits as you go, it also adapts to your style and word choices over time. This also depends a bit on what AI model you're using, but the clever ones usually are quite good at picking up how you sound and making what they come up with sound like you. And speaking of models, if you use a model with a larger context window, like the Claude 3s, and basically all the newest models have quite large context windows, you can read back up to 20,000 words. Some say even more, but 20,000 is like what I've seen in my own projects. And that way, Write knows a lot about the story it's building upon. But if you want to refine a bit more what Write focuses on, you can highlight a specific section of text before clicking Write. This makes the AI only use that part as a reference. Since there's also one important thing to keep in mind, the more preceding text that Write reads, the higher also the credit costs will be, since credits are paid for the input that you send to Write as well as to the output. That way it's possible to pay horrendous amounts for like a couple thousand or 10,000 of credits for like 50 words if you have already 20,000 or something in your document. When the story Bible is activated, Write will also pull in additional context. It currently reads the style and genre, and it pulls from characters and world building and the linked chapter summary. One important thing to note about where are we? World building is that currently when you use the right button, all world building cards will be read, whether you need them or not. It just takes everything into consideration. So for example, if your character's wandering around, that it may pick different locations where the character could head to on its own. But if, for example, you know you don't want it to move to Alice's workshop or Marisol's cafe, you can go and hide all the world building cards that you don't need in the upcoming chapter. That's also good if you want to preserve credits, since, as I mentioned, everything that's read will also cost you a bit. So I always look at the chapter and then I decide which cards are necessary to be included. And this chapter we'll be working on will be taking place in Thompson's Hardware, which is located in Whispering Pines, and they'll be talking about Keller House. So I would leave those 3 cards invisible. And for chapter glue, that's I always struggle to say this in a short, concise way. Chapter glue is like this little summaries of chapters so that the AI has context of what happened before. And that's also something that I always leave in so that the AI knows what has happened. Since currently the AI only knows, at least a white button only knows what's happened in the chapter you're currently in, the preceding text. So I have this little chapter glue card that I also have set on visible. With characters, it's a little bit different. Let's see. Yeah. Characters are pulled in only if you mention them, but it's enough if one part of the name is mentioned. For example, if we were talking about like Callahan House would be in the prompt, it would pull in Nora, but also her sister Grace, even if, for example, Grace isn't relevant right now for the story. Similar, we have our Sam Thompson and Dahlia Thompson. And if Thompson's hardware store is mentioned, also both characters would be pulled in. To avoid this, you can also go and hide characters that you don't want to accidentally be pulled in right now. Grace isn't relevant right now either. This can also happen if you have some name in other names, which the AI sometimes, I can't think of a good example, but would come up with something like, I don't know who Jim is, but for Ellie, something like the carpenter. And then you would have the in the name, and every time this the would be mentioned, it would be also put in. So beware of the is in other names or names for characters is one big advice that I had to also learn the hard way. And something that I also is more general advice, because that's also important if you use the chapter generator. If you have something in a character card that you don't want to be pulled in yet, like this character, I have hidden secrets, I would also put that on never shown. And generally, if you have anything also in world building that could contain spoilers, make sure anything the POV character shouldn't know yet is hidden from the AI. But now that we have talked about some of the background stuff we need to know, let's take a look at the different options you'll find here. With the right button, we have 3 different modes. Auto write is, yeah, it's quite fittingly described as autocomplete plus magic. It continues your story logically based on the context, and you can give it a few hints in the linked outline, or later in write settings, we have key details where you can give it some nudges in which direction it should go. But overall, it's a bit more free form than guided write. In guided write, you can give the AI prompts with 400 characters max, which I think is a little too little sometimes. And it's planned, or let's say it's considered to expand this box a bit. So if you like using guided write, head over to the little feedback and upvote that people want a bigger box. But in general, if you put in a prompt with 400 characters, that works well. It's usually that I'm missing like 2 or 3 sentences, but yeah, would be great if it would be a little bit bigger. But since it's linked to the outline, you could also just put additional information or prompts or instructions into the outline. But it's more precise when it's directly in the guided write prompt. You can also get suggestions. But to be honest, I've never gotten suggestions that I actually thought were good. So I'm not really using this. But if you don't have a good idea about your story already, there may be something in there that sparks ideas. Then there's also the tone shift option. With this, you can change the style of your writing. For example, if you're in a cozy mystery and you're just in an upbeat scene, but then your investigators stumble over the dead body, you can switch it to ominous to change the mood of the scene. I usually don't use this much, since you can also just use this as a guided instruction, like change the tone to be more ominous or something. That also works. But if you're looking for ideas, that's also a fun thing to play around with. But now let's dig into the right settings. Here you have the option to adjust the creativity. And this in generally means how strictly the AI follows their existing text, the direction it's going into. And with lower creativity, stuff is kept on track. It follows direction more closely and gives you the expected output for the genre and for the scene you're currently in. With most, you get a bit more, I can't think of the right word right now, like more creative and more unexpected developments. I usually like to go with 50% in the beginning to set the scene, and then I move to least because I wanted to follow my prompts quite closely. Then you can also set the number of cards that should be generated, which is the number of variants you will get. And you'll have to keep in mind that even if you only choose to use one of those variants, you will have to pay credits for all of them. Even if you don't use anything with them. When I'm brainstorming or when I'm a bit unsure, I like to have a few more variants, between 3 or 6, and then to take from each variation the tidbits that I like best. For experimenting, later I'll set it to 3. Then you can also here choose the length of the card. Anywhere between 500 words, 500 words and 50 words. $250 is, in my opinion, a good length to, this is roughly a page, so it's a good length to shoot for. But it's also approximation only, since AI is quite bad at counting words. So you won't get exactly 250 words, but somewhere in the 200 to 300 range, usually. Then you can choose here your prose mode. We have 3, let's say, curated models: premium, excellent, and basic. And the short little descriptions say quite well. Premium is uncompromising quality. It's great prose, great in following instructions, but it's also really, really expensive. Excellent follows also really well your instructions, has good prose quality, and it's more the medium range in costs, while basic is quite cheap, but also gives you good prose quality and follows instructions well. I prefer using excellent, since in my experience, it feels like excellent is better at pulling in stuff from Story Bible, at least for my story Bibles, which are always very, very full of characters and world building. But basic is also really good if you're starting out and just want to experiment a bit with the right button. But if you use those modes and test them and they're not quite what you like, you can also take a look at the advanced models. Here you have a lot that are experimental. These are like they are not tweaked as much as the other models for prose writing. And you often have newer models here just to try them out and to see how well they work. You have a wide range of possibilities. And you also find some of the retired prose modes, like Best Prose version 1 and Fastest, Unfiltered, Most Accurate and Balanced. These retired prose modes are also good working models. And I really liked working with Balanced in the past. They're very stable still, but their underlying models aren't the newest models anymore. Like Best Prose would be, yeah, Claude 2.0, GPT 3.5 Turbo. They're not the most up-to-date models, but they still work quite well. And a common question regarding those models I get is like, which model is the best? And the answer depends very much on your personal style and
what you're writing about.
yeah, exactly. Also what you're writing about. We have some people who still love Best Prose best, and others who like Balanced or Most Accurate still a lot.
Balance is very good for non-fiction books.
Yeah, that's true. Works quite well for this.
I used to use the other one, the Sonnet, but something is going on lately. It doesn't kind of follow the instruction of the nonfiction anymore. So I went back to Balance and it's working.
Yeah. So even if they're down at the bottom, they're still always worth a shot.
Yeah.
Definitely. And oh no, I didn't want to go for unfiltered. And since this one's called unfiltered, one thing to point out, unfiltered is not the only unfiltered model. In the past, before we got this big variation of different models, it was the only one that you could use for explicit spicy scenes or violence. But currently you could even get like excellent, and I think premium and definitely basic to write unfiltered stuff. So don't feel like you have to go for unfiltered.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Does anyone remember what's the other one inside the experimental, which also worked great with central scene? Because so lately the premium excellent doesn't work for me. It just gives me that red flag.
Oh, that's a good question.
Is it because that or something else?
I tend to use Mixtral 7B Instruct, mostly since I do most of my writing in German, and models like Mythomax or Open Hermes, they don't, or Ouroboros or Goliath don't have very good German. So I'm not good at talking about how their other qualities. I heard good things about, especially Ouroboros. But for German, it's a bit like you give a pen to a elementary school kid. So not
Maybe
really
it's the
usable.
problem.
But I think Goliath is also quite unfiltered, but I like to use Mixtral 7B Instruct. If there's anything that Premium or Excellent are not willing to write for me. Mixtral, I tested this for going a bit on a tangent with spicy plugins, and I couldn't find something that it would refuse to write. So if you have anything that Premium or Excellent or Basic don't want to write, this as one that you can really try with working with.
Thank you. I will try that because I'm working in French on Essential 1, and it's like not listening to me or is giving me the red flags.
Yeah, that's Sudowrite tries a lot to give
Access.
us the most unfiltered versions of these models, but sometimes they still have to do their pearl clutching.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you ever get weird refusals from any of the models, give the result a thumbs down so that the team
Can look at
if
it.
they notice that they're coming in a lot of thumbs down for a model, can go in and do some tweaking in the background
Sounds
to
good.
make it more unfiltered or whatever problems coming up. There may be other issues. Okay. But for today's demonstration, we'll be working with, let's try basic. And the last box here in the right settings that you'll find is key details. These details only work in auto mode. And you can put in here like little prompts and everything that it should keep in mind while it's writing. I like to use this to reinforce the POV I'm using, like Nora's POV. Since even though I always have the information in the style box no, actually I haven't, not in this project, but usually I also put it in here. It's always good to tell it the same information several times so that it keeps it in mind. And with this, I think we've covered everything I wanted to cover in the lecture part of this session. Before I move on to demonstrating a few prompts, are there any questions in the chat?
We kind of answer them as we go. Not really a question, just comments.
Very good. Then we'll head over to some prompts that I've prepared for today. I like to structure my prompts with little instructions in brackets at the beginning to tell it the POV, and something like start the scene with a gripping opening for the beginning of a chapter, or other kinds of instructions are possible, whatever you want from the scene. You can also have something like focus on Nora's shyness, or describe the setting in vivid colors or something. You can use the little prompts for a lot of instructions to the AI on how you want the scene to be written. And I like to structure that stuff that's more of an instruction comes in brackets. And if it's something more about like the, what's it called? Like about the story, like something like the context for a scene, I would use, now I don't know how these are called in English. I know that the other ones are called brackets, but no help.
What is it?
Ah,
Parentheses, yeah.
Parentheses, exactly, parentheses. In German, we just call them round and round brackets, basically.
Yeah, the bracket are the square one, the parentheses are the curved one.
Yeah. So parentheses. And something like context. I can't think of any context right now because I'm always blanking when I in situations like.
Is she
But,
going shopping?
hmm?
She's going shopping? Where's she going?
Ah, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Something like Nora is buying supplies for house renovation.
Yes, Reggie does.
And that also helps the AI to know where we're at
In the story.
in the story, yes. And this is what I've mentioned before, the little previously for the chapter glue. To save characters, I give it a very short name instead of actually saying chapter glue, but this works also quite well. Hardware. Now I'm not sure anymore of whether this will be the right length. We will see. And something about the prompts in here. I try to avoid pronouns since the AI can easily get confused. Like we have Nora and Ellie, and even if for us it would be logical who the next upcoming she is, the AI could be like mixing the characters up or bringing in someone completely unrelated. So it's always best to stick with the names. And this prompt, usually I would go with guided by, but for demonstration purposes, we'll give a shot at autocomplete during the beginning. And in that case, I would put the prompt into the key details to tell the AI in which direction it should be moving. Hit here. And if we hit right, it will start writing the cards here in the history column. And it's taking some time. Good. And what you see, that was interesting number, 888 credits for this. But what you can see here are the so-called chiclets. These are the cards that were read while they were writing the scene. These are the characters pulled in.
The blue is right there. All the stuff you put in your little paragraph.
And also here which chapter of the outline was. Right. It was missing for a while, but now it's finally back so that we know exactly what kind of information gets passed to right.
That's great.
Now we have 3 different versions. That we can read through and then pick a version we like, or we can combine them. Do not spend too much time on this.
I think the
I think
last
I'll go.
part has more dialogue. Is it possible?
Yeah, I think this one has, yeah, it looks like there's more dialogue, and it doesn't start with the bell chimed when they stepped in. That's a bit above the door chime, cheerful welcome. So I was like, that this it immediately caught my attention since it wasn't the most what's I expected start.
The chime is after two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's stark contrast, but
I kind of like it give more description on when she gets inside the store. So you give more the description of when when she got inside the store, you know, she stepped into the hardware store, she felt a familiar tug of
yeah,
wrap around like a thick fog.
yeah, it's nice. She stood just inside the threshold, watching Andy stride forward in the shortness that made Nora envious. But that's a nice
Hey Sam.
it showed there the dynamic quite well.
Yeah.
Hey Sam, Ellie greeted. Ah, if it isn't my favorite carpenter, what can I do for you today? This is Nora Callahan, Vivian's granddaughter. Ah, Sam said with a knowing smile. Everyone knows Vivian in this town. And now that we have picked our beginning, I usually head over, change my write settings to a bit to follow more closely where I want to go with my story. And just let me take a look how many words this produced. Yeah, around 250. So I think it's good to stick with this one. Something funny I noticed since I'm writing in German is that for German, a lot of models produce lesser words, fewer words, whatever. Since German words tend to be longer, so they need more tokens to write German words. So we get less words out of 250 words. Cuts.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not.
Like we said, the AI doesn't know how to count.
Yeah, it's really. It has its own ideas about counting, and never trust an AI counting anything. It's fascinating, considering it's a computer. So, and computers were built to count, but whatever.
Now, what
Not
do you
this
do with
AI.
the details that she's already in the store? We know how she's feeling about going inside. Are you going to keep that inside that key details?
Since we're switching to the guided write, I would usually just leave it in, since
You're going to
while
switch it.
there's anecdotal and evidence from people that I've heard that also guided write would look at key details. In my experience, it doesn't. And I asked Michael to ask the developers, and he confirmed that officially it doesn't look at key details once you switch to guided write.
Interesting.
So it would be safe to keep it in there, but it's still really curious that a lot of people say they noticed it influencing, but maybe there's a ghost in this machine that remembers stuff that we don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe sometimes there are little glitches in our metrics that cause those issues. Now, I had prepared this next little beat, but looking at where we left off, Sam already showed up. So we would have to leave this part out. Since with write it's always, since it's not always, not only looking at the prompt or the information that you gave it, but also down here at the outline, it knows how to continue if your prompt is too little for the AI to write 250 words. So it sometimes jumps ahead a bit. And in that case, I just shuffle my beats around a bit so that we proceed at the right spot. In this case, I would leave out the beginning, then turn attention to Sam's attention to Nora, recognizing Nora as Vivian's granddaughter. And then maybe take this maybe up to this part. For the next 250 words. And if the AI doesn't, is more efficient, it's likely that it will just jump ahead a bit again. And for this following prompt, I like to use this little, accidentally clicked on quick edit, but at least I didn't accidentally click on, oh my God, I have high quality on. Didn't accidentally click on describe, which I usually do when I accidentally click on anything in this menu. Okay. But where was I? Yeah, I continued scene seamlessly is a prompt that I like to use to make sure that the AI picks up where it left off. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it helps with the AI not just starting off with a new thought and finishing the sentence that was left open. But something important to keep in mind about instructions like this is that the AI models evolve over time, and stuff that used to work may not be working anymore in a couple days or a month. So you'll always have to evolve with the AI. And sometimes I find it's also easier to tweak things manually afterwards than trying to craft the perfect prompt. For example, if this would not pick up and finish the scene seamlessly, you could use quick edit to finish the sentence, which is also a very good way to go about this. Let's head back over. Sam said with a knowing smile. There we go. Got it right. Let me check the settings once more to make sure that it sticks with what we want. Then we put this in here. go here and go and let it write our scene. And another thing, while it's writing, as you can see, this is in violet, the text, and all of the AI generated text is in violet until you start to edit it, then it turns black. So that's a good visual cue for yourself to see which parts of the text you generated you've already touched and worked on. And now we have, Sam said with a knowing smile that crinkled the corners of his twinkling eyes. And for a moment, Nora felt like a spotlight had been turned on her. Vivian's granddaughter, he repeated as if savoring the words. It's an honor to meet you, dear. Nora blinked, cut off by the immediate warmth in his tone. She could feel a flush creeping up her neck. And then they start their little conversation about Vivian, the grandmother in question. And yeah, here you can see the moment that I went back a bit to make this one paragraph, it's now black. And in this way, as I've proceeded now, I would just go on through the whole chapter and adapt. I usually have a mix out of my outline and beats for the prompts that I use. And I would just go through this and until I'm at the point where the chapter closes. And if I'm actually writing the story, I also spend a bit more time editing and reading through everything and interacting more with the prose and sometimes filling in gaps myself. But we don't have the time to do this now, but I had a Write With Me series where we were working on this project at the big end of last year, which is now online. So if you're interested in this, you can, in this process, you can get a more in-depth view in this series. Okay. But for today, I think we have enough time for another little prompt, unless there are many questions in the chat, since for once, we're actually in the prescribed timeline. I'm all shocked that I actually have now still after the finish, the scripted part, 10 minutes for questions, which I always wanted to have, but never managed so far. So are there any questions in the chat about the right button?
So far, chat is clear.
Then we have a little time for some more experimenting. Maybe going with something different now that we have time, since there are also a few things with right that you can also experiment with that I don't always get to show. If there are more questions than today. And one thing that you can also use this for is some brainstorming. I just have to look. Let's go here. Like you could ask, give me.
Okay.
If you're struck.
Yeah. You want to explain
You
what
have a
you
question?
just did there?
Oh, what I just did here?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I had created a blank document,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's not linked in the outline. But you can go here and update and choose a chapter from your outline that you want this to be linked with. This way, like I chose the third chapter, and now it's linked up to this third chapter. You can also, if you go on this little chapter generator icon, even though I'm not using the chapter generator, I always like the fact that I can see the linked chapter summary if I open this. Let's see if I'm actually linked up to the chapter I want to work on and not accidentally to a different chapter. It's also easier to just go and read it here than having to scroll down to the outline every time. And so that's also a neat little way. And sometimes I would just also use this box to store my prompts, not with the intention to actually generate something, but just to have it here as notes. Like, since I don't use the chapter generator, this is like just my box for notes for each chapter, since we currently have no other way to leave notes for a chapter.
Yeah, Dahlia has a very interesting workflow.
Yeah. Yeah, I really noticed that I'm a bit more of an outlier with my workflow. But I think it's very valuable to see the different teachers' way of working, since that way you can see what is possible to do with Sudowrite, and that there's not just one prescribed way that you have to follow. Like, writers are very individual, and I don't know if I ever met two writers who work exactly 100% the same way. So it's good to see that you do not have to follow one way to reach the goal with Sudowrite, but that you have several paths that you can go down with. Like, you could also just use the story Bible, write it yourself, and then use the laser tools for editing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many words you could go about with writing.
All right. So what's
But
going to do next? I want to see.
yeah, I actually haven't tested this in a while, so I hope that it will still work. Is that you can use guided write also for brainstorming help. Like something like give me this chapter to start, or something like this. This may work or not. It's a bit like with other tools, if you use them for something that's not exactly what I asked for, but it's still a nice beginning. Yeah, we had this with a different class, the Vorführ effect, the presentation effect in place that makes it not work. But let's see if I turn this off. And I know it wouldn't know anything if I turn it off. But you can, yeah.
Wonder if you did ask for less and put in brackets instead.
If I put it in brackets?
Yeah, and ask for less idea, it's too much then. Like ask for 3.
Mm-hmm. Let me.
Give me 3 idea on how this chapter could start.
And maybe avoid writing prose. May also help.
Let's see.
But that's also what you just see as a important, it works.
It's working.
Important part about working with AI is the experimentation, since you don't always get what you want on the first try. A moment of connection. This is nice. Yeah. Sensory secrets of Sam's hardware stores. That's one way to name this chapter, but okay. Prompt.
I like the Nora internal monologue.
Yeah. Sensory description, Rosenthal.
It's great when it's first POV or a narration.
Yeah. Yeah, that gives you a few more ideas how to work with this. That's nice. And if I'm ever stuck, I like to use this to get few ideas in which direction I could go with the story.
How much credit that use?
Let's see. That was all rather cheap, like 608. And the nice thing about using Write for brainstorming like this is that you can choose different models, while if you use QuickChat, I mean, in general, you could also ask QuickChat about this, but with QuickChat, you're basically stuck with the two models that are possible there. With one, if I'm not mistaken, is GPT 3.5 for the basic mode, and advanced is, I think, GPT 4. But if you want a different opinion, you can basically chat with premium, excellent, and a lot of those other modes. And Thomas, I see you.
I hate to ask you to do more work, but could you add, I didn't see this tip in the document. This is a cool tip, the brainstorming tip.
Yeah, she's
I
going to
can
put that
add this.
there. Yeah, she
I
will.
will link this in the document, this one. And I just make a little note. I thought I had it somewhere in the tips or tricks section.
We are at the top of the hour.
Yeah, we're at the top of the hour. Great. Then if there are still questions, now is the time to ask them. But I see I have a rather silent crowd today. But in that case, first, I want to say a special thank you to my co-hosts, Manon and Thomas, for their amazing support today. I couldn't have done this without your help. And of course, thank you all for your curiosity, energy, and engagement that you brought here, because I noticed at least that there was some conversation in the chat. And it's always a pleasure to guiding you through your Sudowrite experience. If you have a moment, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback is really invaluable for us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this class so that we know what to keep and what to change about this. And I wish all of you happy writing, and I hope to see you again in class soon. And bye-bye.